Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. Hope everybody's having a beautiful day. Hope the Sunday's treating you right. Hope the birds are singing. Hope the sun is shining. The wind is at your back. Greg Shanken, ladies and gentlemen. Some build brands. Greg builds frequency. CEO of Gloss by Title, but in truth, a digital alchemist, spinning data into destiny and pixels into psychedelic prayer flags. He's the glitch in the algorithm that remembers we have souls. Where most sell clicks, Greg summons revolutions. Half marketer, half mystic, he weaves SEO with serotonin funnels with freedom, Google Maps with mycelial maps of the mind. A rebel with metrics, an insurgent with heat maps, a seer in a sea of salesmen. This isn't marketing, this is medicine wrapped in code. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Greg Shanken, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, man. I'm stoked you're here today, man. What's new on your side over there, man?
Yeah, what's new is everything related to psychedelic science. We're just over a week away, and wow, it's going to be a wild ride. I was at the last one, and this one's going to be an even wilder ride. So I'm excited to meet you, excited to meet so many people I've Zoomed with, and now we can have hugs. So looking forward to lots of hugs.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time, especially for people that are around the industry, because I think for so long, so many of us have been so deep in like sort of the the rules, the engagements, all of the laws and all the excitement. We get so wrapped up in it, and it's difficult to explain sometimes to maybe the regular people that are out there what's really going on. But everyone's going to be together, man, from all
Yeah,
parts of all the industry. It's going to be wild.
yeah, it is. It's going to be exciting. And sometimes I call the other people, the regular people, or the normies, and I was kind of sharing that little anecdote to someone else months ago, and they said, "No, we're the normies." So just something to chew on. Who knows? We're all normal or not.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a crazy word to think about. You know what's abnormal and going to be incredible over there is like the whole psychedelic Playhouse gig they got going on. And I know you're a big part of that. I was wondering if you could maybe kind of break down what that is and some of the events that are going to be happening there.
Sure. So it started as the germ of an idea many months ago. I wasn't even involved at that point.
All right.
From Jacob Tell from District 216 and Christian Gray, super connector extraordinaire.
Yeah.
And then it's just grown and blossomed into what's going to be a huge 2-night event. And there are, plenty of evening events after the psychedelic science, daytime, a lot of great events for sure. Um, and Psychedelic Playhouse is really, it's got something for everyone. So there is kind of the late night music DJ, if that's your jam. It has a whole bunch of panels and speaking all around, many topics around psychedelics. And I'll be on one of those panels on psychedelics and masculinity, which with some
Ooh.
incredible panelists. Yeah. And one for women and all sorts of topics. And we're going to have art. And that's my job to bring in art installations. We'll have live painters. We'll have projection art and an interactive art installation, which is going to be amazing. And what am I leaving out? Food and lots of hugs. We'll keep coming back to that theme. Hugs for everyone, whoever wants them.
Yeah, I'm excited for just the all around entertainment. There's also like a Shark Tank event going on there. What do you know about that?
That's right. Yeah, thank you so much. I can't even remember it all. So Psych Tank. So Psych Tank, kind of fashioned after Shark Tank, and it will be 3 psychedelics related businesses, all of whom made it after some, really serious selection criteria, and they'll be pitching their businesses. I mean, they're all in business, but looking for, to bring their next, up level their business, bring it to the next level, looking for advice, additional investment, provided by our community. So thank you for bringing that up because that's another big part of the Playhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, shout out to Matt Ritchie out there who and Caesar, all these people that are putting on Kyle. Thank you guys so much for everything. And of course, you can't leave out Carly. Carly Dutch Green's like a wizard on the backstage, just creating so much magic. We're so thankful to have everybody over there pitching in.
Yeah.
Greg, I can't get away from the idea of meaning. And it sounds to me like just being involved in this group and psychedelics alone, I feel like the whole world of psychedelics is bringing so much more meaning into the world of marketing. And you have a huge background in marketing. I was wondering if you could talk about that relationship between meaningfulness and marketing.
Yes, that's a insightful question for sure, and something that I speak a lot about because the convergence of psychedelics and business. So that could be another way of kind of
Sure.
echoing what you just said. Marketing and meaning, right? So psychedelics helps us tap into our own meaning, and then there's the business side. So we are um, kind of looking at ancient wisdom and medicines that have been around for thousands of years, and now we're bringing that into a modern, westernized, colonialized society and framework. And that's not good or bad. It just is. And so, we have healers, we have mental health practices, and then we have amazing speakers and thought leaders and influencers. And how do we bridge that gap from things like clicks and KPIs and traffic, and ensuring that we are, preserving ancient wisdom and meaning and healing. And so I think many of us are trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And this is something I'm passionate about. So I'm glad you asked the question. How do we do that? There are also some other challenges in the space right now. Um, Many psychedelic related accounts have been taken down
Yeah.
by Meta over the past several weeks. Some have come back up, some have not. And some of the brands in this space, nonprofits, for profits, they rely on social for their traffic. And so it's caused quite a stir over the past few weeks, right before the largest psychedelics event in the world. Is there a connection between the timing? I don't know. And I mean that. I don't know.
Yeah, no one does.
Some of these accounts have come back up. So, is this coming from algorithms? Is it coming from humans? We don't know. What I do know is that this has shaken quite a few people up. And so, a part of what I'm looking to do is how can we bring this into our own community? How can we help each other without having to rely necessarily on the Metas and Googles of the world? I mentioned Meta, but Google doesn't allow paid traffic for many types of brands in the space, whether it's based on legality or just a lack of understanding or algorithms. We just don't know. What we do know is that it's very hard to rely on these networks to build one's brand or nonprofit. And so, kind of back to your original question. So, we're all here for meaning. We're all here for personal growth, for raising our consciousness, for helping our own mental health. And then once we, from our own personal journeys, how do we bring that to our communities in the world? And that's kind of the passion. I mean, that's the passion that brought me into this space, but I know that is a common thread among people that come in. You don't come into this space because like you think it's interesting. You come in because you have had a transformational experience or a life-changing journey. And so then you come into this and it's, well, how can I maximize my impact? And for that, of course, we live in a digital world. But then we're, running into roadblocks as I've shared. So, maybe roundabout way of answering your question, but, kind of bring it back to what you said, meaning and marketing, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, these are some of the themes that I think about, that I talk about with clients, that I talk about in the nonprofit work I do. And I think we'll be hearing a lot about that at these events, Psychedelic Science and Psychedelic Playhouse, and many of the other events and programming that we'll have next week.
Yeah, it's really well said. And you know who I think has really gotten it right out of all of this is Jacob Tell with District 216. That seems to me to be a model for a way to not only inspire and captivate, but also get a marketing messaging out there. And for those that don't know, everyone go check out District 216. This guy, Jacob Tell, and what he's got working on there is phenomenal. I want people to think about, imagine going to a theater-like setting or even like a home ambiance-like setting and watching an incredible panel of speakers that you're totally enthralled in, for like say 15 or 20 minutes or maybe 45 minutes, and then all of a sudden having an incredible band come up and play some acoustic music, and then watching those two sort of performances shake hands and create their own sort of conversation. And that's kind of what I see happening with Psychedelic Playhouse. Like they're bringing in so many different parts of the community, and they're all coming together and speaking about how to change that community. And what you're really seeing is an actual meeting of the minds from different industries coming together to figure out how to build something that's meaningful. And when I look at marketing today, I see so much of us moving away from manipulation. Like when you look at the next generation, they begin to see, they can smell the commercialization, they can smell the commodification, and they're instantly turned off by it. But when you start putting in real speakers up there that have a real message and talking about real products and real services that can create change, like that seems to me to be where we're headed to in this whole world. And I think psychedelics is leading the way. We're going to see it at like the Psychedelic Playhouse event. We're going to see it at the Iboga Saves event that I'm working on. And you're going to see it at Psychedelic Science. I really think it's sort of a prototype for how you can get out into your community and create actual change, man. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, so well said. And I'll start with where you ended, community. So
Yeah.
that's what we have. That's what we're building. That's what we're growing um, through live events, through virtual events, through discussions like this. I was at a local roundtable in Boulder earlier this week, and it was just, but 14 people sitting around a table, just talking and sharing about psychedelics. So
Yeah.
it gets down to that really grassroots level, literally down to one-on-one, like we're doing. Of course, then you'll help us reach a larger audience here, but it could be us just,
Yeah.
chatting over coffee, or, a 10,000 person event, which is what Psychedelic Science will be. And so, but, you mentioned Jacob Tell, who's doing amazing work with District 216 and the events that he's doing. And what that's doing is, it's bringing people together face to face. Of course, we have so many mechanisms of, utilizing virtual technology, and that's great too. But it's these events that bring us together, that help us connect with one another, share with one another, share our stories, whether that's from a personal healing place or what we're doing to bring our message into the world to affect change. And kind of back to your previous question, my
Yeah.
response, events is a way to kind of bring the power and control into our own hands. I don't mean that in a kind of mercenary way. I just mean that we have the power and the control to create these events, and again, whether online or offline. And if we can do that, without relying on, large centralized networks where we don't have a lot of control, the more we can do that, the better. And
Yeah.
so again, kudos to Jacob in District 216, kudos to what you're doing to bring, meaningful conversations and, amplify our voices, through platforms like yours, George. And so those are some of the things I think about, community events that bring us together, and doing more of that in a way that where we're leveraging each other's networks to get the word out, instead of, or at least in a complementary way to what some of the large digital networks are, that don't really get what we're doing, either because they're humans that don't get it, or algorithms that probably will never get it, because how could algorithms understand ancient wisdom and healing and transformational growth and consciousness, although maybe AI starts to understand consciousness, but that's a whole other topic. But kind of bring it back to where you started, George. It's through community events, and how can we collaborate to amplify our voices.
Yeah, it's really well said. It brings about some ideas to me that maybe for too long we've relied on these platforms to build businesses. Like we really got into this space where we're so enamored by clicks and views and likes, but at the end of the day, a lot of those don't ever really transmit into real growth or real opportunities. It's sort of like we have these virtual connections, but how often do those virtual connections bear fruit unlike community of what you're talking about. So maybe this is a real lesson in building from the ground up. For so long, we've had this sort of centralized model where we built from the top down, and you would start with influence up here, and it would trickle down, and you could hit all the different media channels, and you get your message widespread out there. That still exists. But maybe the model we're working with now in Psychedelic Playhouse, District 216, all these events are showing us a whole new level, like a mycelial model, where everybody on the ground kind of comes together, and then you can reach a wider audience. What are your thoughts on the changing the changing landscape of how we're using these tools?
Yes. So first of all, I totally agree that I think over the years and maybe decades now, a couple decades,
Yeah,
we have relied on um, resources that maybe we don't have control over. And again, I know these are charged words, so uh, but they also are what we're dealing with, right?
yeah,
If
totally.
your whole business is reliant on two, huge global conglomerates, then that's that's a thing, right? That can backfire, as we've seen over the past few weeks. And so I love the word mycelial. Of course, anyone in the space loves that word and what it stands for, what it means, and I think that just speaks to it's using a more heart centered and medicine centric way to exemplify community and events that we're talking about here, again, live or online. And so I always think about, and people use this term, so I certainly didn't coin it, but how do we build our own mycelial maps?
Yeah,
And um, 2023 was my first time attending this event, and when I just look back at kind of the size and scope of my map then and now, there's just no comparison. I mean, it's just absolutely exploded. And that's based on just my being focused and passionate in this space. But I don't say it to turn attention to me. I mean that we're all doing that, right? You're doing that right now, and so grateful for that because you have a platform, right? And so the more we can build our mycelial maps through, and I train on this, so I do business web marketing training for psychedelic training schools that have students that they're training on the psychedelic healing piece, but not necessarily on the business marketing piece. And I share strategies and tactics and all of that because those are important and still useful and impactful. But I always end my trainings talking about how to build one's mycelial map. And there are so many ways to do it. Um, you know, uh, Getting out to events, and I just call it leaning in, like saying yes to everything, that makes sense and is aligned with you. But the more I say yes, especially when it's yeses that get me outside my comfort zone. So one of my mantras is say yes to anything self-serving that's outside my comfort zone. And the more I do that, the more I personally grow and build my maps or my map, and the more collaborative opportunities arise, like working with amazing teams for Psychedelic Playhouse or through my nonprofit, which is on my hat, Colorado Psychedelic Society. So it's kind of like anything we can do to lean into community, friendships, and how that aligns with our own personal healing and getting out of one's comfort zone. And I was just thinking about this today. Things that would really get me nervous, anxious 2 years ago. I'm just picking that because that was the last psychedelic science compared to today. Um, it's like what used to kind of freak me out then is sort of like, yeah, I got that. And then I have new growth edges too. So I certainly don't have it all figured out. There are things I think about. I'm like, wow, man, I don't know if I could do that. But then if the opportunity presents itself and I do it, and then it's kind of like I broke through that growth edge. And then of course, always another challenge. But kind of back to your question, George, building our mycelial maps and not just our own mycelial maps, but how do we connect our maps to other like-minded, heart-centered people, like yourself and people at the Playhouse, and that's what these events are so impactful at doing, and so that's why they're so important.
Yeah, I love it. It's really well said. And I especially love the part about leaning into your uncomfortableness or finding ways to feel uncomfortable, because growth and comfort can never coexist. And if you find yourself on the edge of doing something, but it feels too uncomfortable, that usually means you're right on track and you should try to push harder into that area. Obviously, think about the things you need to do before you make a rash decision. But if you're on the fence about something uncomfortable, it usually means you're pretty close to the mark. I want to get to a couple questions we got coming in here, Greg. The first one comes to us from Desiree. She says, what's the difference between a brand that sells and a brand that heals?
Mm, mm. So there are plenty of brands that are doing both.
Yeah.
And then there are brands that are doing one and not the other. So I think it's a great question. So thank you for that, Desiree. There are brands that are selling but not healing. I just learned about, I don't remember the brand name, that is selling Iboga microdoses.
Mm,
And I'm just pausing because it's like, really? Where are they coming from? What do they contain?
yeah.
Iboga and ibogaine are again, ancient plant medicines. Who knows what's in them? And so I haven't tested the product, nor would I. But to me and other brands like it, those are brands that are selling but not healing. On the flip side of that, there are brands and businesses that are doing lots of great healing, but they're not getting enough clients in the door or revenue in the door. And this is where kind of that convergence of psychedelics and business, and their service centers in Oregon, and quote, service center is what Oregon calls their regulated um, psilocybin healing model. And it sounds kind of like a place you bring your car in, but I didn't invent the word, and I don't know who invented the word, but probably it wasn't created by someone in this space, because service center kind of sounds funky. No offense to Oregon. Whenever I talk about Oregon, I was why I always do the,
Bow down.
because they were the first. They were the first.
Yeah.
And I was an ambassador for Prop 122 in Colorado, which legalized mushrooms here. In literally a matter of weeks, maybe even days, the first healing center, that's what we're calling them, will be opening here in Colorado. But back to the question from Desiree, I know that many of the service centers, in Oregon are struggling, and they're bringing clients in the door and they're doing tremendous healing, but many of them are struggling. So they are healing, but not quote selling enough. And that's generally not because they're doing anything wrong. Of course, in any industry, some businesses are doing better and more effective marketing than others. But in our nascent, is it nascent or nascent? I don't use the word very much, but burgeoning space, emerging space. I'll look at the pronunciation later. You have these service centers in Oregon. They've been open for 12, 18, 24 months, and they are, of course, coming from a place of healing, but they're running into a lot of these thorny issues that I speak about and that we're talking about now. And I'm giving a long-winded answer from Desiree's question, but I think it's a really, really important one. So they are looking at how to market their businesses. They are having their social accounts shut down. They can't use Google at all because, as we know, psychedelics are still federally illegal, just like cannabis. So how do they market their businesses? And it comes back to some of the themes that we've talked about, through community, through events, but it's still challenging. And then it gets into areas of awareness and accessibility. So that's something else I'm really passionate about, but it really does touch on this or answer this question. Someone who heard Oprah talk about psychedelics and says to themselves, wow, like that's interesting, I want to pursue that. They might not even live in Oregon, and they know that's where they have to go, soon to be Colorado as well. Well, they might not be able to afford to travel there. And then they might research it more and say, okay, I'm ready to spend some money on this. And then they learn that a journey is $3,000. And by the way, it's not just the journey that's 3,000. It's prep sessions, the journey, which is 6 to 8 hours, and integration. So when you break that all down, healers in this space that are working above ground, they're making about the same as therapists are. But if you're someone coming into it and you're not a quote psychonaut like we are, right? You're going to say $3,000 and I might have to travel there. No way. And so then they're not getting the healing that they need. or it could be a military vet who can't afford that either. And so, again, I love the question because there are businesses that are doing tremendous healing, and then there are businesses that are just selling. And so obviously the sweet spot is, right, selling and healing. And that's kind of like what we're hoping to um, move forward with Psych Tank, and helping those businesses, and bringing more investment into the community, and working as a community so we can ideally find that sweet spot for as many businesses and brands as we can, so that we can be selling and healing in a way that is supports this whole community, and um, maximizes mental health and transformational experiences, and raising our consciousness as a species, which gets woo woo, but I do feel like that's kind of like that overarching goal. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can talk about psychedelics without getting into the woo-woo. And I know that science likes to measure things and have an exact way to define what it is that's happening. But it's very difficult to put a label on an awakening. It's very difficult to measure the tears of a spouse who sees their loved one moving in a world freely again. It's
Mm.
difficult to really measure these things, to have these metrics, which often go hand in hand with selling different things. And so, unfortunately, so many of the metrics we use today are used to define legitimacy. You know what I mean by that? Like, okay, well, show me why it works. And if
Hmm.
I say, well, look at this guy who was confined to his bed in depression and now he's out getting a job, or look at this father who was never around for his kid and now they're out playing baseball. But the science seems to ask the question, yeah, but why? How do you know the psychedelics did that? Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of evidence to support that it has. And I think that's where we are in sort of this psychedelic renaissance, is trying to quantify how and why something works. But I often go back to, do you need to know why it works? It works. Just look at
Right.
the people that are using it, like it works. But that gets messy, because then you start having a difficult time selling it. You have a difficult time, centralizing it, finding an authority around it, and that so much of those things are needed to really build up an industry around it. I don't know. Sometimes I think it drifts back into the underground where it's always been on some level. I would love to see it be above board and touch more people and help out more lives. But maybe the seeking and maybe the fact that it is underground is part of an individual's healing process. The courage to go and look for something that's taboo. There's a lot of medicine in that, because you have to ask a lot of questions and find the right people and understand and do the research in order till you find the thing that you need. What do you got? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, you said so much, and my thinking brain was going, I want to touch on that, and that. One thing I've been working on myself is breathe and let my you know, non-thinking brain respond. So, you said so many things, and one piece that stood out is paraphrasing. You can't put a price on your mental health or happiness. And so that's another piece that comes into it. I touched on before, the accessibility, because if I said to you, it's $3,000 to get yourself out of being confined to bed and back to work. And by the way, I was one of those people. I know what that feels like. I've struggled with depression, and psychedelics have helped me so much. So to that person, pay $3,000, and if you don't have it, you're going to find a way to find it. But that number doesn't seem quantifiable. It's $3,000, right? And I'm talking about the above ground. You talked about
Yeah,
the ground too, and that those are different economics. And that's another piece, is that someone
yeah,
coming in, who's not a psychonaut, doesn't have access to underground resources. And even if they did, they might feel it's unsafe. They want to walk into a healing center, which is a, brick and mortar structure, and it's, quote, legit. I mean, it's not
yeah,
quote legit. It is legit, but I'm saying someone who doesn't, understand the full sphere of this, and that there are underground resources, might think of, quote, underground as, a deep dark basement, and
yeah, totally.
some guy with a bunch of beads shaking around, right? And yeah, right.
Moon
And so
Panther.
yeah, exactly. And so, and then just kind of touching on some of the other pieces you brought up, then you have governing bodies like the FDA, that they do want to see results. They want to see tests and studies in the same way that pharmaceuticals are approved, and that takes years and hundreds or thousands of tests. And is there some validity to that? I think so, because they're ensuring safety. Like, for example, they will hopefully go after, iboga and a capsule companies,
Yeah.
and right, because we need that too. And so again,
Yeah.
this is like that convergence of ancient wisdom and ancient medicines and the world we live in now, right? And so many of these pieces sometimes are at crosshairs, sometimes make sense from an indigenous, kind of ancient wisdom perspective, but not in today's world, or vice versa. Like, we have to look at things through the lens of what we have, but then that's at odds with, how these medicines started in the first place, and how these, practices are, are now coming into the above ground space. So you said a lot, so I had to say a lot. So hopefully
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure there were things I didn't touch on that you said, but yeah, I mean, I love this conversation because these are the types
I
of,
know.
yeah, discussions that we need to have. So we're having them. So thank you again.
And I think coming up, like at Psychedelic Playhouse, at these events, for anybody listening that feels themselves engaged in this conversation and wants to know more, if you can make it out to Denver on June 17th at the Psychedelic Playhouse, maybe you're in Denver right now and you're like, I didn't even know this was happening. If you just look at the little ticker down below, you can find tickets to it and check it out. But these are the kind of conversations that are going to be there. And I think that beyond the conversations that are going to be there, the people that are going to this event, like the Psychedelic Playhouse, are going to come back to their communities and have real tools to build and understand the framework moving forward. So I see these events like Psychedelic Playhouse or Iboga Saves as real meetup points for people to go and learn and then bring back information to their community. There's gonna be some wonderful speakers coming up at the Psychedelic Playhouse. I think Dennis is gonna be out there. I think Malika might be out there. Kat's gonna be out there. Of course, Christian, Carly, Jacob, Kyle. You're gonna be there. I'll be there. There's gonna be so many cool people just riffing and sharing ideas and so understanding the business platform. What are you most excited about for this particular event at Psychedelic Playhouse?
Hmm. Excited to meet and hug all the people that you said who I haven't met in person. Some I have, and then those who I have will have some more hugs. So yeah, I'm most excited for the community aspect of it, um, which touches on all of the programming that we'll have, be it Psych Tank, be it late night DJ sets, be it you know um, learning from each other at these lectures and panels. Um, so it's what I'm most excited about is just really like the feeling, the feeling, and the I'm kind of repeating, but just the community aspect of it, just
Yeah,
connecting with other people in our space who get it, want to grow it, and then also the curiosity seekers that may be newer that are here to learn. And so
yeah,
that's how we all grow our individual and collective mycelial maps, right? We need to widen the circle. If it's just us all hugging each other and we're old friends, that's great. Yeah, that's great, but we need that. We need to increase the size and scope and breadth and depth of that circle and map so that we can raise awareness, education, legalization, and still be respecting indigenous rights and reciprocity to the cultures that have gifted us with these medicines. So all that stuff I'm super excited for.
yeah. Greg, you've been working quite a lot on the business side, and especially with psychedelics. Maybe you could has in the last year, have you seen a lot of people coming to you to set up businesses around psychedelics? I think you are in the trenches and you're getting to see maybe the industry being built in real time. Is that fair to say? Is there your business kind of shot up a little bit? Are you seeing more interest in the psychedelic space, or how has this industry or burgeoning industry begun to affect what you're doing as far as building a business and marketing and helping people?
Yeah, so I've had a web development digital marketing agency for 12 years, but only been working in the psychedelic space for about 3 years. And that is, the marker there is
Yeah.
my first sip of ayahuasca tea, January 22. And, I came to that because I really wasn't feeling a lot of passion in my life and career. and that led me to the medicine. I had been on SSRI meds for depression for about 12 years, and so I know at a very, very deep personal level the struggles with depression. And then actually when I kind of emerged from depression, then anxiety came in and reared its ugly head. Um, and so I've been through the ringer, as many of us have,
Yeah.
and that brought me into a place where I could start to say, well, what are my skills and superpowers, and how do I bring that into the space? And so at that time, it was web development, digital marketing, and still is. And so my focus now on the business side is focusing on clients in this space, and it, like any sort of industry or vertical. And sometimes I hesitate to use like these very business centric terms, vertical business KPI, but that
It's true.
those aren't bad words. That's just what we have, right? But it's like kind of feels funny sometimes. We're talking about ancient wisdom and medicines, and then clicks and KPIs and funnels, right? But so with that as the kind of foundation, sometimes I'll use those words when they make sense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I work with a growing number of businesses in this space, be it service centers, healing centers, even ancillary businesses like attorneys that work in the space, ketamine clinics. And so, yeah, I mean, the growth in this space has created more, demand for the types of services that I provide and many other businesses provide. Um, and on the web development side, it's like very smooth and simple and straightforward, because we're basically creating websites that are, we've done great work for a dozen years, and now we're applying that to, businesses or brands in this space. The marketing side is presenting challenges, as we've
Yeah.
talked about. And so on the marketing side, I kind of touched on it, but I'll maybe tease a little bit more. I am working on a concept where we have a mycelial network in this space where we're all helping promote one another in a very collective, collaborative way, in a way that doesn't need to leverage the traffic resources from these algorithmic global networks. And so that's what's most alive for me right now. Web dev, we
Yeah.
got it. Marketing, really nobody's got it. There's right. It's just because of all the challenges. And so that the very challenge that I'm sharing that exists, I'm looking to help solve that problem through and I'm being kind of broad in general right now, because it's a concept that will more to come in the upcoming weeks. But how can we align our mycelial maps in such a way so we're working together and not having to buy traffic from this place and that place that just may not understand what we're all about. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing, along with some of the challenges that I've shared before around accessibility and legalization. And so yeah, those are some of the things I'm doing in my on the business side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome to see. Let's see. We got some questions coming in here. This one comes to us from Neil. Neil says, is the next frontier of marketing not more automation, but more awareness?
Wow. Got some great people asking questions right now.
Got the best audience in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So yeah, I mean, awareness is a huge part of what's going to bring this whole movement forward. Awareness, education, overcoming stigma. We have this collective fear of psychedelics going back to the 60s, people taking, acid and jumping off of buildings, and then our good old buddy, President Nixon, legalizing these medicines because people were taking LSD and not going to Vietnam, right? So we have that side of it, and so the awareness piece, I think, is absolutely paramount, and that's why these events are so important. Playhouse, psychedelic science discussions like this, or like I talked about, just one-on-one on the street. And I was out flyering and postering today for Psychedelic Playhouse, and it's just funny, like people just see you put up a poster, and I actually had a clipboard with the posters like just laying on a bench, and I was hanging one up, and people just see the clipboard and they're like, what's that all about? What are you guys doing? So I mean, like,
Yeah.
it does get down to that grassroots, literally like a piece of paper on a bench, and then up to a 10,000 person event like we'll have next week, and then of course at the Playhouse. And so the I forget the first part of the question. There was awareness, and then he was balancing that between awareness and maybe you could just jog my memory there.
Yeah, he was talking about. Oh, sorry, Neil. Let me jump back to this question. He was talking. I think he was just curious about the future of awareness and like if we see
Yeah.
marketing moving in that way. But I think you answered it, and I want to touch on the idea of the grassroots. Right now it seems so much, at least to me, like the 60s. Like right here in California, I'm in Northern California, but in Southern California, you're seeing all these riots happening. Like I can't help but think, wow, like this is the 60s about to be set on fire. If I was in Southern California or was out that riot, like that's a perfect place to be handing out these flyers because everybody is not only desperate for change, they're desperate for meaningful action in their life. And I think this is what's happening with psychedelics. They seem to go hand in hand with times that are uncertain. And we find ourselves in an incredibly uncertain times. And that's where psychedelics, awareness, change begins to happen at the grassroots level, is when all these things are happening. Do you see some similarities between what's happening right now in the political climate or maybe in the world climate and what happened back in the 60s?
Yeah, there's certain similarities, but a whole heck of a lot of differences
Yeah, of course.
between America now in the '60s and then what's happening globally. And actually, I'll be speaking on a panel at Psychedelic Science through my work with as co-founder of Colorado Psychedelic Society, and I'll be sitting with
Nice.
the French Psychedelic Society and the Swedish Psychedelic Society, moderated by Steve D'Angelo, who is kind of a godfather, grandfather in the cannabis space. And I mentioned that because in kind of prepping for this panel with those other organizations, I'm learning that it's not surprisingly very different between America, Sweden, and France. And so we talked about hope for veterans before, and so much great
Right.
work's being done with veterans and psychedelics. And of course, Sweden and France have veterans, and I'm sure some of them have PTSD, but it's nowhere near what we have here. It's like that's not their path into this, whereas that's one of our big, not the only, but
Yeah.
big paths into this. And it's like something I never, I try to think globally, of course, but in meeting these peers in this case Europe, it's like Sweden doesn't have a million. They don't have 22 combat vets committing suicide every day. I'm sure there is some suicide, but not to the extent that we do. And so we have like that whole piece of it. And as far as like us or now versus the 60s, of course we have a lot more awareness now, and people back then were just kind of like, kind of like doing a bunch of LSD, and that's okay. A lot of it was lined with like Grateful Dead, and I'm a old school Deadhead, so like I resonate with that for sure. But people didn't really know as much of the risks back then, and then of course the risks were distorted when saying that these drugs are bad, they're evil, they're going to make you jump off a building, uh, you know make you crazy overnight. um, and so we have a lot more awareness now. And one piece on that, which has kind of come alive for me recently, is that back then Timothy Leary is one of the pioneers in this space, and he actually came up with the concepts of set and setting. And I had the honor of meeting his son, Zach Leary, for a fundraising event we did back in Boulder about 4 weeks ago. And Zach released a new book called Your Extraordinary Mind. It's a great, great read. And of course, he talks about his history growing up with Timothy Leary as his father, which is certainly a
Yeah.
thing. And then moving away from that when his father passed, he actually went into the corporate world and digital marketing. And so we got to kind of align and jam on the Grateful Dead and digital marketing. It was pretty cool. And the reason I bring all this up is in terms of now versus the 60s, because his father 60s, his son now kind of carrying the mantle, and Zach came up with the concept of sustainability, which speaks to and encompasses a lot of integration, which, as you know, is such a big part of the journey. But back then it was, his father again coined the term set and setting, have the right mindset coming in and have a very safe setting. But it just wasn't kind of known then, like what to do after the
Yeah.
journey. And we all know about it, anyone in this space, integration, but Zach kind of came up with the term sustainability. How do we sustain that, growth and learning from the journey itself? So and of course it's an S, so alliterations. Now it's setting, right? 60s, Timothy Leary, and now Zach Leary sustainability. So just kind of getting back to your question, the themes like this are what make um, today's psychedelic sphere so uh, different. And then I touched on U.S. versus globally, and really the U.S. was at the forefront of this because of the '60s and the Haight-Ashbury era and Grateful Dead and LSD. But now really it's a global, um, yeah. I mean, it's a global path towards this because of the awareness that we have now.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about the way in which the rest of the world may see what they may see through their psychedelic lens. When you talk to these other psychedelic societies, what are some differences? Like you had mentioned that maybe PTSD and veterans are our path inward, or it seemed to be focused on the path inward. But what are some other pathways or some lenses that these other psychedelic societies in other countries are seeing it?
Yeah. So I mean, of course, um, this is kind of addressing the sameness. Mental
Yeah.
health is a huge catalyst. It's a global epidemic. It's certainly a U.S. epidemic. Um, Existing, solutions and pathways and modalities, just aren't working or aren't working as effectively as we would like, or cause long-term side effects or short-term side, all that stuff. It's you know, we kind of know or are seeing. Um, in terms of kind of what some of the differences or different pathways, like you said, is a whole area around spirituality. So mental health is getting the kind of uh, the most exposure, and I think that actually is good, because then that can help raise awareness and help government entities like the FDA pay attention to this more, and
Yeah.
especially with veterans, because veteran support, it's a bipartisan issue, you know
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. But there's a whole other aspect of this, and this actually Zach talks about in his book, um, and that is around spirituality and raising our own individual and collective consciousness. And he talks a lot about kind of a theme of cognitive liberty. So,
Mm.
should governments allow or disallow us to use medicines that we feel will help, that may be outside of the big pharma? And by the same token, should they be allowed to uh, tell us what to do or not to do with our consciousness, right? I'm living in this body, you're living in your body, and you have this body, and you can walk around and drive a car and put food in your mouth. Who, it's like I'm at a loss for words, because it's kind of ludicrous once you start
Yeah.
getting, how
Yeah.
can a government tell me what to do or not to do with my consciousness? And so those are, it's kind of addressing like some of the different pieces of this. Yes, mental health for sure, but spirituality, consciousness. And so I think that also kind of brings us into a global sphere too. It doesn't matter if you're Sweden, France, right? Uh, China, right? Portugal, anywhere. Right. We all should have this cognitive liberty. We don't all have it, based on
Yeah.
various governments and controls in place. And so, yeah, those are some of the things I think about when we talk about, you know, the global piece, and then kind of our individual societal pieces of this.
Yeah, it brings up this idea of rewilding. I think Simon van der Els was the first person I spoke to that had mentioned it to me. But this idea of rewilding the mind. And I know it's really fun to say, rewilding the mind. But it seems for so long we've traveled down the pathway of specialization that we've gotten lost in like the really fine details of everything. Like we're just drowning in abstraction because everything is so finely tuned in the details. But when you pan back and you see it as a whole and you look at the global community, you go, wow, it doesn't seem like anybody's really happy living the lives we're told to live, especially in the West, where you're told, look, go to school for 10 years or for 15 or for 30. If you go to a higher education, it seems like you're probably going to come out with a lot of debt and come out an indentured servant. Maybe you'll pay off the debt, maybe you won't, but you're not going to be released into the world and doing this thing that you want to do and being successful at it. And then if you take another route, maybe you just go straight to work and you make a little bit of money, but then all of a sudden you find yourself bogged down in the American dream of trying to own a home and have two kids and be successful, however you want to define successful. But that isn't working for people anymore. And it seems to me that that is so much of what this mental illness and the whole DSM-5 or 6 or whatever DSM they're on now, there's all these labels out there to label you as the problem, and then for the society to sell you the cure, when in fact we're the cure. The individual is the cure. The rewilding of the mind is the cure to all that ails you that's happening right now on some level. But what are your thoughts when I say rewilding the mind? What comes to your mind?
Well, first I want to say it and see if it's as fun as you said it was. So,
Try it. Try
rewilding
it.
the mind. It is fun.
I
Yeah.
know.
I want you to tell me other fun things to say
I
when we
will.
meet next week. Yeah. Just tell me it's fun. I'll say it. Yeah. So again, so your questions are so rich. And so much of this does come back to, colonialism, right? So
Yeah.
everything changed when people, cultures started conquering other cultures, and we could spend a whole hour talking about that. But in the past 100 years, 150 years, especially in the past 50 years, 20 years, so many seismic shifts have changed. And to your point, we are told at a young age, like, this is the path. You
Yeah.
get grades in high school, then you get good grades in college, and then you'll get a job, and then you'll work your way up the ladder. I mean, we know those themes. And then along with that, you are suffering, so take this pill. And then you believe that's the way, right? Whether that's your career path or your mental health path, or like I touched on before, like, what about your own consciousness, and how many people are even thinking about their own consciousness? Most people
Yeah.
aren't. I don't say that in a critical way. They're not, because they've grown up and been taught or shown or told, this is the path, career wise, mental health wise. And now, thanks to psychedelics, and we're collectively learning that there are some other ways of doing things, and maybe some better things. And that doesn't mean that psychedelics is for everyone. And if
Yeah.
you work a 9 to 5 job or 100 hours a week and you're happy, awesome. I'm happy. Truly, I'm happy for you. Really, like, as long as we're happy, right? But if you're miserable and you're saying, what the F am I doing here? And you're not feeling fulfillment or meaning, and you're taking a pill that might be giving you side effects, or is simply helping, not healing, right? So many pharmaceutical meds, they help, so they tamp down symptoms of depression. And I'll pick that one because that's what I struggled with. And I was one of those folks who, I'm not treatment resistant to medication. So for me, they, quote, worked. They did help. They made me not depressed. Okay. But to your point, this kind of brings it together. I was, for 12 years, I was in this like tunnel vision piece of, okay, I'm not feeling depressed. But then it hit me like a ton of bricks one day. Well, okay, I'm not depressed, but am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Is there meaning? Kind of, what the F am I doing? And then that
Yeah.
led me down the path and brought me to where I am now. But think of all the people that either maybe aren't even aware that that's happening at a conscious level, or maybe they reached the point I did, but they don't know what options exist. Like, I was very fortunate. A close friend of mine is a psychedelic healing coach. So he started opening my eyes to what's available. But how many people out there? I mean, millions or tens of millions, hundreds of millions, like, this is my life, and kind of sucks, or I have these side effects, or maybe these meds I'm taking aren't even helping me with depression, but this is what I got, right? And so
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like, how do we bridge that gap? And that just comes back to things like awareness, education, legality, community, mycelial map, kind of tying together a lot of these themes that you've so thoughtfully helped us discuss here today.
Yeah. Well, these are, I don't know, I love these topics and I love learning and I love talking to people like you. And I'm really excited for the event at Psychedelic Playhouse, Psychedelic Science 2025, Iboga Saves. there's so many cool events that are happening out there, and these are just a few of the topics that we're going to be going over and learning and trying to workshop out and bring back to our communities. And I'm grateful for it. The whole team over at Psychedelic Playhouse, you know what? Who else is going to be there is Caesar Marin and Diego Ugalde, two giants. Every time I look at Caesar, he's on another stage somewhere, whether it's like a fashion industry. Like that guy's
Yeah,
everywhere, man. He's
yeah, he's
crushing it.
great. He's great.
Same thing. Diego too. He's got Warrior Side. Warrior Side, I know, has been working with in conjunction with House of Blues, and they have their own like TED Talk for first responders. Man, it's super powerful stuff out there, and so stoked to get to meet everybody for the first time. And but as we're landing the plane over here, Greg, where can people find you? What do you got coming up? What are you excited about, man?
Yeah, so you can find me at gregshanken.com. That's GREGSHANKEN. So that's kind of a launch point to a lot of the work I've done. It has other videos and podcasts I've been on. It's got links to Colorado Psychedelic Society, which is the nonprofit of which I'm a co-founder, and we'll have a booth at Psychedelic Science. I think it's booth number 1100, but just look us up, stop by. It's going to be great. You can meet some of our awesome volunteers. It is nonprofit volunteer. So that's going to be awesome. We'll also be at the Playhouse as well. And, link to my agency. So that's glosstech.io, GLOSSTECH.io. But again, all this you can find at gregshanken.com and some of the other projects and speaking that I've done. So yeah, just going over to that site and you can connect with me there. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. And so far, thankfully, LinkedIn is
Yeah.
very psychedelic friendly. It's kind of worked out well for me because I've never been a Facebook, Instagram guy. Nothing wrong with that, but I fortunately haven't been hit by this rash of closures because that's just not where I've, kind of spent my time. So yeah, LinkedIn is great. You can connect with me there. And yeah, one other thing I'll say, George, is that it kind of just sounds like, it's like, I just love talking about psychedelics. I love it. I love it. And I sometimes say talking about it, but that makes it sound like kind of one directional. I love sharing with
Yeah.
people about psychedelics because I'll also just shut my mouth and listen to you and your story, for as long as you want to share. So it's sharing about psychedelics, whether it is pointing the person in the right direction when they say, hey, what microdosing, what's this all about? Or where can I find a facilitator? Also, I'm in training right now to become a licensed
Nice.
psilocybin facilitator. Yeah, in Colorado. So it's through an amazing program called Intertrack. They're out of Oregon. I mean, I can't speak highly enough about them, but there are so many great training programs. So I'm plugging that one because I'm in it and it's awesome. So I can say that firsthand, but so many great training programs out there. And so really, I mean this, like reach out about anything. If you want to like talk and, kick it around and jam about psychedelics, like it's the favorite part of my day. Like sales calls, sure. Like networking, great. But like when it's just like someone reaching out, like let's meet and talk, like the door is open.
I love it. I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're within the sound of our voice, go down to the show notes, reach out to gregshanken.com. Be part of the movement. If you're not happy with what's going on, then be part of the solution. And that's what we're talking about today. I hope this conversation is an invitation for anybody out there who's curious or wants to learn more, then now is the time. So hang on briefly afterwards, Greg, with everybody else within the sound of my voice. Psychedelic Science, Psychedelic Playhouse, June 17th, 2 nights. Come check it out. That's all we got, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.